Welcome to the 30th episode of the Most Serious Podcast. In today's episode, one of the most requested guests of the show returns. Dr. Vineet Aggarwal was back on the podcast. If you haven't listened to the first conversation, click on the link above to go listen to that. Dr. Vineet Aggarwal is an Indian author who writes about Hinduism, its culture, and Hindu mythology. In this episode, we talked about a lot of different things, which cover topics like rituals. Why do we follow rituals? Should we follow rituals even though we don't know the logic and science behind them? How we often heard that earlier people and rishis did tapasyas for a longer duration of time and eventually God appeared in front of them to grant their wishes. Was that true? And if true, can it be done now also? We also talked about incarnation of gods. When will we see the next avatar of Vishnu? Dr. Vineet Aggarwal also talked about some not so famous gods and their stories and their relevance in the Hindu culture. We also talked about finding purpose and meaning of your life. What does the Hindu culture and our scriptures have to say about it? How do we start a spiritual journey and why it is important to be connected to our spiritual selves? All of this and so much more into this episode. I always enjoy talking to Dr. Vineet Aggarwal. He's a very humble and a very learned person. I hope you like the conversation today. Let's get into the episode now. Dr. Vineet Aggarwal is back on the Most Serious Podcast. This episode was demanded, like people were messaging me and people that I don't know. And, so people who listen to this podcast and are like friends, they talk about this episode was good, that was good. Random people reaching out to me on Instagram. You have to get this guy back on the podcast. You have to ask him these questions. So welcome to the Most Serious Podcast again, Dr. Vineet Aggarwal. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Ripu, for having me back. I think it's been a journey of sorts since our first podcast, and a lot has happened in between. And I'm glad to see a lot of people getting into these questions that you've also mentioned, and a lot of people getting the curiosity again, to find out more. I think so. This podcast would be a good sequel to the one we did earlier.
Yes, it sure will. And, like last time we also started talking about with this curiosity only, and you talked about all the different verses that there are. And, that really stuck with me, fool now, start asking questions and how important curiosity is in our culture, how important it is to not suppress the desire to find out or, to explore more, to find out more. So that's the intent behind this episode also. I've had compiled some questions and let's go. Let's ask you all of these. Are you ready?
Sure. Let's see how many we can cover, but I'll try to do justice to as many as possible.
That's awesome. That's what we need. So the first question, this also like I think about, when someone sent me this and I was also thinking about it, that there's this divide of people whenever something comes up related to Hindu culture or whatever culture, whatever religion people talk about. So they say that things now are not relevant to what they were in the prehistoric times or whatever, so they don't think that this time is equal to that time. So most of the things that applied then don't apply now. And this certainly brings to the rituals that we follow, right? So there are many rituals. Maybe it's lighting a diya, or maybe it's putting sindoor for women on their foreheads and things like that, right? So they say that these are not relevant now. And why would someone practice them still if they don't know about the reason behind them or the logic behind them? And most people don't know the logic and reason behind them. So my question to you is like, following them makes us superstitious, or like following them is like an unknowing benefit of those practices that we reap unknowingly, whatever the logic of it was?
Right. Ripu, a very good question. Actually, a very practical question, because we do perform certain rituals that we do not know the significance of, and sometimes the questions do arise. Why do we do this? And, why should we keep following these rituals or customs or, dressing habits or, the ways we adorn ourselves, etc. But again, I would say there are a lot of such rituals or traditions, I would say, that do have a deeper significance, that do have a deeper meaning. There may be a few which are surviving only because of habit or only because of continuity of, passing on that tradition through generations. but a lot of them do have some significance. For example, just talking about applying of tilak or bindi, on the forehead. It is supposed to cool your highest chakra, the chakra which is at the forehead, just behind the junction of the eyebrows, So it's supposed to cool it, and it is supposed to help you become more aware of your environment. It's sort of like awakening the third eye. Now, the traditional material that was used to apply the tilak or the bindi was kumkum or haldi, which also have medicinal properties. Of course, when you're applying artificial chemical, that is not really helpful in achieving that purpose. When we're using the material that was recommended in the scriptures, I think then it serves its purpose actually, but otherwise it becomes a ritual, And again, I don't see any harm in following a ritual as well, as long as it makes you feel connected to your heritage, as long as it makes you feel a part of a bigger whole, of a bigger community. A ritual is unless it's harmful to someone else, If it's harmless, you're doing it for yourself, your own happiness. How does it make a difference, if you want to follow it or not follow it? But there are a lot of scientific reasons, for things that we do. Like even in the pandemic, a lot of people realized the importance of greeting others by not shaking their hands, by no physical contact, right? So namaste took a different form altogether. There were world leaders doing namaste, to greet each other. So and at times like this, you realize that yes, there was some sense, in these rituals. There could have been some logic why they started, and probably we are missing that logic now. But again, I'll give another example from the pandemic that there's a mandatory quarantine period, of 10 to 14 days now. And at the time of a person's death in a Hindu household, there's a period of quarantine for 10 to 13 days, after which you do the kriya or the bhog, So this period is actually meant to ensure that, there is minimum interaction of the household with outsiders, So it's so that in case, there was some infectious disease because of which the deceased passed away, it is not spread in the community, So there's so many reasons, which we can understand now, which makes sense now. Why do we leave our footwear outside when we are entering the home? Why do all the precautions, the sanitary precautions that we were following at least in the lockdown, all of them or most of them are already there in our culture as our rituals. You're supposed to bathe 3 times a day, according to our scriptures. You're not supposed to touch unclean things. Whenever you go into the kitchen, or the person who's cooking food has to wash their hands and feet, and preferably take a bath, before going into the kitchen to start cooking. So there's so many things which, if you don't understand the significance of it, you feel that it's just unnecessary superstition. But when you realize that it is a matter of hygiene, which they were following, and in a country like India, which was a tropical country, there must have been various other infectious diseases as well, and all these rituals were meant to safeguard people from these things so that, you follow precautions and you stay away from all these infectious diseases that are moving around. So I would say a lot of it makes sense. And the only missing link is we don't know the reason or we don't know the logic. But even if we try to explore, I think there's still some sense that we can find. It's just, people are not willing to put a little effort in finding out why things were done or why this is relevant. But a lot of sense still remains in many of the rituals. Some maybe only because of continuity of tradition. And it's up to you, whether you want to follow or not.
That's so true. And I think what habit that we've gotten, like in general, like our Indian, I don't know if it's true for Indian community or like as like on a global level also, that we've fallen into this path of rediscovering things and we want to try them out for ourselves before we say that this is true. And in some senses that's true, and in some senses that's helpful. But again, sometimes I know that you must have related to this as well, and to the younger people that do listen to this, and they might also relate to this, younger than me, of course. So like your parents usually in your childhood, they told you, okay, go light a diya or sit in front of Bhagwan ji and, fold your hands and say your prayers. And in school, certainly this happened, morning prayers and everything. And as a young kid, I also sometimes felt ki, why are we standing in this, morning sun? Let us go back to our classes and things like that. But as you grow older and you sometimes look back on your life's journey or your practices that you had earlier, and sometimes it makes sense ki that moment, that was a reflection moment in the morning, and that was a gratitude moment, and it didn't have any logic, and to a kid it doesn't make sense, but it showed you that you can have gratitude in the morning and why it is helpful on shaping whatever your day will look like. And so these are things that catch up on later.
It also has a lot of scientific value also, Ripu. Exposure to sunlight early in the morning, when the sun is not very harsh, and it's supposed to help. I mean, sunlight helps create vitamin D in your skin. That's a scientific fact. Vitamin D in our bodies comes through the exposure to sunlight, major chunk of it. And that is a reason you would, if you talk to anybody, any doctor, they'll tell you that vitamin D deficiency is very prevalent in India. India is a tropical country. How are we getting deficient in vitamin D? Because all of us are sitting inside air-conditioned offices now. We are not exposed to the sunlight. And, this Surya Namaskar or, getting a darshan of the sun in the morning, and even rituals like, there's you're supposed to take a early morning oil bath on the day of Dashera, and this custom is not as prevalent today in the northern part of the country, but in the south, a lot of my southern friends from the southern states, they still follow that custom on the day of Dashera. In the morning of Dashera, there's an oil bath that you need to take with til oil, with sesame seeds, the oil extracted from sesame seeds. Again, there's logic to it. It's almost the beginning of winter, and before that happens and the sunlight starts to dwindle, you want to get maximum exposure to sun so that your body gets that required vitamin D, which can last you for a couple of months. So all these rituals have some kind of science behind, which it's just that we don't understand these points today. But when you start analyzing through the prism of science, you realize that a lot of these things start making sense.
Do you think that, and we're talking like of these rituals as if they are obviously like very old and 5, 7,000, 10,000 years old, I don't know, but do you think that events those happened, and I am always interested to talk to you about these, and I certainly sometimes text you also, that events like Ramayana and Mahabharata, these are the epics of the Hindu culture. Do you think that these events are like possible still in the future or in our times, or maybe like if a world war happens, let's say, and I don't want it to happen, but let's say it happens, so would we, going into the future, 5,000 years into the future, would we look back at it and say that this was something that happened, similar to the events of Ramayana or Mahabharata? So is that possible, or like, is that just thinking out loud? And
most definitely it's possible. See, the epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata are known as itihas. They are our history, and history has a way to repeat itself, right? So we've seen multiple wars happening. We've already seen 2 world wars, and the 3rd world war could happen anytime. There's so many countries that are like literally waiting to pounce on someone else and trigger the 3rd world war. So it is a definite possibility. And if you go to the gist of the stories, of Ramayana and Mahabharata, what is it a story of? Ramayana, the entire Ramayana was triggered because of the ambition of one man, which was Ravan. Because he wanted to become the overlord of the entire universe, and that is what triggered the Devas to go to Lord Vishnu and ask for help. And that is why Vishnu ji took took birth as Lord Ram, right? So, and again, there was also the ambition of a woman, which was Kaikeyi. So, she wanted her son to sit on the throne. And you see these things happening so many times in our own politics. In our own country's politics, you can see things like that happening where, a family wants to retain power, and it's not just one party I'm talking about. You see multiple parties in a political spectrum have that vanshvad, going on, the nepotism which is happening. So how is it different, from that era? Or even Mahabharata, it's the fight for property, it's the fight for land. And you see brothers, real brothers fighting for property, for their parental property today, and it's, of course, doesn't take the form of a nationwide, war, but definitely it can happen. A country, in our continent, I would refrain from taking names. There are so many rumors of a country attacking its neighbor, or it's just imminent. It's about to happen. Everybody's saying it's about property. It's about annexing more territory for yourself, and of course, then someone will react, or someone will fight against, this forceful occupation. So they're definitely possible, and I don't see any reason to consider that these are things of the past. In fact, in our own history, in our own so-called modern history, we have seen so many wars happening in various parts of the globe, which even the world wars, they were triggered by very small events, and very, very small events triggered fights between two countries, and then their allies were forced to join, and then you had countries from Japan to America, the entire globe getting roped into it, and soldiers from India. There were so many soldiers who were martyred. It was not even a fight that we had with anybody, but just because we were ruled by the Britishers, we had to support them, and there were so many Indian men who lost their lives, in these fights. And that's the same, that's the same for the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, where so many people, so many humans, vanars or demons or whoever, they lost their lives because of ambition of one person or two people, So they're definitely possible in the future. And that is why history is important. That is why learning your lessons from history is important, to avoid, such a situation. And Mahabharata, they say, was probably a nuclear war because of the way they've described the effects, of the astras, the Divya astras that were used. And next war that we'll have will definitely see some action on the nuclear front, right, on the atomic front. So we don't know what will be the consequences, but we do know after Mahabharata, what all happened. We were literally thrown back thousands of years in terms of civilizational achievements, and we had to restart again, in the Kali Yuga with the Magad dynasty, the Maurya dynasties, the Gupta dynasties, actually then consolidating things. So it will take another 100 years or maybe 1,000 years, to get back to where we were if a war happens again. So it's a lesson that we have to remember, that we have to learn, and hopefully, in a positive way, avoid such a situation from happening.
This explanation, like in general, also I think about these two topics, and these are like related to what you just said. The first one would be, you said that when the situation worsened here, then Vishnu had to bring in an avatar of themselves, and they certainly helped it out. And so on that front, like an incarnation of the god, or an incarnation of Vishnu to be specific, how do we know that there's an incarnation of Vishnu present? Or is it like predefined that at this point? And I heard you talk about the Kalki avatar, which will come when the Kali Yuga ends, and that has been already defined. But in our current times, can we think, or maybe can we assume that maybe an incarnation of God is present, or it has some rules to it on whether they will appear or when will they appear?
Right. So see, the scriptures do mention when the avatars will happen. They do mention some of the signs, some of the physical attributes, even the location where they will be born. The previous avatars have all been listed, of course, where they were born, what was the astrological conjunctions that were existing at the time of their arrival on Earth, and what were the signs that appeared. What was the situation, and we all know, the Janmashtami story, how things happened. So if there's such a grand entry of God on Earth, everybody would come to know, right? You would assume that everybody would come to know. But still imagine that, there were people like Kans, there were people who tried to kill that avatar, that tried to kill the baby Krishna, So there are people who would probably still not recognize God, even if he or, he's in a form standing right in front of them. There are people who would not recognize. But the scriptures do mention there's certain attributes. And also I feel, it's also a characteristic of the avatar that the avatars you assume that they would be of a certain category. You would assume that they would have that kind of knowledge, first of all, to guide people, to guide humanity. They would have that knowledge, they would have that background of Vedic knowledge, or at least growing up, the avatar would learn from a guru who would be providing him or her that knowledge, to base their actions on. For example, for Kalki, we know that Parshu-Raam would be training Kalki. So we know Parshu-Raam would be giving training, the martial training to Kalki, which he would use to achieve his purpose later. And, we know there are other Chiranjeevis who are still existing who would be helping Kalki, like Hanumanji. He's waiting just for the return of the Lord as Kalki. So there would be different events happening which would give us some idea that this person is probably an avatar. The avatar will never tell the world that I am an avatar sent to save you. Ramji never said that, right? Krishnji only told it to Arjun. He didn't grandstand in front of the whole army. Had he shown his Vishwaroop to the entire assembled army in Kurukshetra, the war would have been over right then. And people would have been like, oh my God, actually God is here. So let us just stop fighting and, live together happily. So the avatars will not grandstand, they will not, talk about their own greatness. That is again one of the characteristics, that there has to be some humility. And, you see so many people claiming to be avatars, today. You just Google, you'll find a list of people who claim to be, the next avatar. And the first thing that, puts me off is that you're claiming to be an avatar. You shouldn't need to claim, it should be apparent. It should be apparent to everyone, and not just to your own followers or disciples. It should be apparent to everybody that yes, you have something different from normal humans, and you have a personality or you have some achievements that you can boast of. So there are some characteristics that are given in the scriptures. There are some attributes that you expect from an avatar based on our historical data, which is available in the epics, how the previous avatars were. There's some attributes that you would naturally, given the circumstances, for example, Kalki would appear towards the end of Kali Yuga, and we are told that, things would be really, really bad at that time. And, he would start by destroying the evil kings or the evil doers or the evil rulers of that time. So if some such incidents start happening in the future, that will be an indication for us that, yes, probably this is the person, who's meant to be the avatar. So I think it's a mix of what the scriptures tell us and what we, using our common sense, should infer, and also the circumstances that are, whether the circumstances are suitable for an avatar to appear.
That's right. And the second part to that question would be, I often heard about, like, whenever I heard stories from my mom or from my grandmom, that, so people, or they even write these in like children's storybooks, like people did very grand tapasyas and, rigorous, I don't know, what's the exact term, like, praying to God maybe. And they went on to mountain tops, and it snowed and it rained and the sun was out, and they just kept standing on one leg. And then maybe finally after some time, God appears, he grants them wishes, or she grants them wishes, and they move on with their life with whatever boons that they've got. First of all, I'm pretty sure that this was true, because it does sound very interesting. I hope that it's true. Second would be, if it's true, then can it be done now also? If yes, why? And if not, why?
So it's an interesting question, Ripu. I feel, first and foremost, the difference is that, in the earlier yugas, people are supposed to have a longer lifespan, right? So they're supposed to have had lived for hundreds of years, at least, if not thousands of years. So it was possible to do such a long penance, a long tapasya, and it was possible for them to achieve something out of it, get something out of it at the end of it. Unfortunately for us, the lifespans are much shorter. So it may not be practically possible. And that is why, the rules for each yuga change. So I think, as I mentioned in one of the podcasts earlier, that, in the Satyug, it was this tapasya, which was supposed to bring you to God. And in Treta, it is temple worship. In Treta, it was yajnas. So at the time of the Ramayana, it was the yajnas, grand yajnas that were done to connect with God. You hear of the stories when, a yajna was performed and either Agni Dev appears from it, or some divine being appears from the fire and, blesses the people, the yajmans who are performing the yajna. In Dwapar, it was temple worship. At the time of Mahabharata, people attained God mostly through temple worship. And we have so many examples, even in the Kali Yuga, where it is in the scriptures it is mentioned that in Kali Yuga, it is just taking the name of God that can help you. The devotion or bhakti. You don't really need to spend thousands of years in rigorous tapasya, or you don't really need to do grand yagnas. It's only taking the name of the Lord that can take you there. And we have examples of, saints and various sages, even in the Kali Yuga, you have example of Mirabai. It's believed that she merged into the idol, of Krishna at the end of her life. And, there are other examples, of such saints achieving salvation, in a similar manner. So I don't think it would be practically possible for us to repeat what the rishis did. One, because they had a longer lifespans, and secondly, it is not required because for us, we have been given that liberty and we have been given that opportunity to achieve, or at least attain God or achieve salvation, through a simpler way of doing, because our intellects are smaller, our lifespans are smaller, and God, being merciful, has allowed, different rules for different yugas. And for us, it's an easier proposition. It's just that we're not doing it.
We've become like as lazy as someone could be. Now God has said you don't need to get on a mountaintop and pray for me for hundreds of years. I'll do what you want, man. Just could you just be mindful of what you're living right now?
Yeah.
So, and I texted you about this in between, and we talked about this. You sent me some article links, and when we were talking about like the role of women in our culture, and you sent me about different devis and different avatars of devis, and that I read those articles, and then I thought about this question that we like even unknowingly, and even like if we don't want to consciously study our culture. It so happens that we get to know about most of the famous gods, like about Lakshmi, about Durga, Shiv and Brahma, Vishnu, and about Indra. And so about the main gods that stand for positive values, and children are told, or even people are told that this stands for prosperity, this stands for wealth, and so on. Now what happens is like and you also talked about this last time, that we have like thousands and thousands of gods, and each of them doesn't necessarily stand for like it's an embodiment of human emotion. That's what you talked about. And so I also asked you about this, that we don't know about some of the gods that are not very famous. The sister of Lakshmi, who is Lakshmi, and she is the goddess of misfortune. And maybe I don't know if I'm correct, but we don't know about different forms of Shiva. It's called a Rudra form of Shiva, where it's not as very positive, and like we teach it to children, or we talk about like the positive values that they exhibit. So could you tell me more about these gods in general? Like I'm very curious about them, and also on what can we learn from them.
So Ripu, to be honest, we don't really have thousands of gods. We do have thousands of divine beings.
Okay.
But the gods are very limited in number. We have the Trinity, and we have Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. We have Durga Ma, Shakti, Adi Shakti, and then we have the slightly lesser gods in the hierarchy, which are the 33 gods. Which is basically the council of gods that governs this entire universe. And besides those gods, those gods are led by Indra. And the list includes Indra, Agni, Som, Vayu, all the gods that we know, and there are others that we don't know. And amongst these are the Rudras. So these 33, out of these 33, there are 11 Rudras, and these are manifestations of Lord Shiv. Now Rudras basically are responsible for destruction of the creation when it is right time to destroy. A lot of people don't understand that this is not a negative thing. Destruction is not a negative thing. And because of this destruction only, there is creation that can happen again. So destruction and creation are a continuous cycle, and Rudras are important for that destruction. So unfortunately, we think of it as a very negative aspect of life, but death or destruction is a fact of life, and that is why we have to be aware of it, and we have to accept it as a part and parcel of life. So the other gods or goddesses, as you mentioned, Alakshmi, or there's another one called Niriti. There's some lesser known goddesses like Shitala Mata. There is Shashti Devi. There are other goddesses, or Mansa Devi. So there are goddesses that were more or less, not very prominent in the scriptures. They have been mentioned in some places, but again, their worship was associated with a very small geographical region most of the time. So that is why they were not very popular, but of course, people understand that, they have a specific role to play. Even in our scriptures, they have a specific role to play. And there's a very beautiful story about Lakshmi and Alakshmi, where it says that, Lakshmi stays in the household where there is peace. And there is peace among and harmony among the family members. So wherever there is, there's fights, or there's arguments, or there's arrogance, which results in sour relationships within the family members, Lakshmi leaves and Alakshmi comes. So that is the logic, that, it's just telling you that when you are living in harmony with your friends, with your family, with your society, that is the time you can prosper and you can get Lakshmi. But if you're living in discordance, if you're living in a environment in which you're not very happy and you're not making others happy, you're fighting continuously, or you're cribbing, or you're sulking, all the time. So that will not lead to good fortune. It will lead you to take some decisions which may not be very helpful in the long run, and it's always said that you should never take a big decision in life when you're angry or when you're upset. It has to be taken with a calm and cool mind. But if you are taking those decisions in a heightened state of emotions, that decision may lead you to Alakshmi, which is misfortune. So that's the logic of having these different so-called gods or deities or spirits or divine beings mentioned in the scriptures, to tell us that there are all of these are ultimately in your hand. What you want to achieve in life, which God will give you blessings, depends on how you perform your work or your duties or your actions. Yeah, so I think that is the reason of having these gods or deities, present in the ecosystem or in the Hindu pantheon, to tell us that everything or these forces, whatever situation you create for yourself can become bigger than yourself. Why are we calling them gods, or why are we calling them divine beings? Because these forces can become more significant or more important than your own efforts if you continue on that path, and they will start controlling your destiny. Once you take a wrong turn in life, it's very difficult to come back to the original place. So that is why these forces are considered divine, or they will control you if you make wrong decisions in life.
See, that's again the beauty and this expression of the Hindu culture, right? And we talked about this in the end of last episode as well, where you talked about, certain people have dark tendencies, or certain people have those energies, and it doesn't say that it's not exclusive of those people. And like, we couldn't have had a goddess of misfortune. Like, there wasn't, you could say that there was no need, but it certainly acknowledges that this happens, and it doesn't say that everything in life is positive and every decision that you will take will be the right one. But it allows
Yes.
you to know the difference between both of them, and also make a conscious decision on what you want to do for yourself. And that's
Right.
exactly the expression that it follows. Can you tell me about
Yes.
dreams, and what does dreaming mean? I'm not talking about the dreams that I take when my online classes are going on, but the dreams that we see while we sleep. And do they have a meaning, or it's just what we were thinking about before sleeping? But according to our Hindu culture, because they also have this mystic element to them, and people have their theories on it. But what's your view of dreams according to our culture?
So dreams, I think, are very fascinating subject. We don't really have a lot of scriptural information available on dreams, but we do have some very interesting stories, mentioned, where people within the dream have experienced reality in a way that they forgot that they were living in a dream, and when they wake up, they're so confused about what is their actual reality of the life. So it's very interesting. We have a lot of stories in which people time travel in their dreams, or people see different versions of themselves. It's sort of a multiverse or a metaverse concept that they see. There's a very beautiful story in the Yog Vashisht, if I'm not mistaken, of a queen who's praying to, I think, Saraswati, to revive her dead husband or dying husband. And so Saraswati Ma, she appears and she takes her to a journey, in a vision, where this woman is, traveling and seeing the various other versions of themselves, of her and her husband, that have existed. So it's a very interesting concept, but scriptures don't really throw a lot of light on it. But, from a scientific perspective, I feel that, it is your mind, that is trying to explore. When you're sleeping, the physical boundaries or the physical laws do not exist for you, right? So that's why in dreams you can fall from a very high place and still not die. The worst is that you will wake up, with a jolt. But there are so many things, because the laws of physics do not exist in our imagination. Dreams are a means to explore things that are buried in our subconscious. Many a times, they bring up things that were long ago, that have happened in your past, and certain random recollection of something would actually bring a dream to your mind, about a person or about an incident. So dreams sort of bring up those hidden or subconscious memories which are already existing in your brain. At one level, that's the thought. Another level, people think that dreams allow you to explore this world, beyond what your conscious mind does. So in a dream, you can fly, you can, you can explore, you can visit a country that you've never been to. And that again, who's to say, when you're in that dream, who's to say that that is not a real experience? Right? So for you, it's a very real experience. You are actually enjoying that journey. You're enjoying, if you're in the snow, you're actually enjoying the weather, or you're flying in the air, you can actually feel the wind on your face. So it's a real feeling that you get, and it's a way of for your mind to break the boundaries that the body puts it in. And in our scriptures, it is said that mind is the ruler of all the senses. But it's our body that limits our experiences, because it's the senses that limit our experiences. We can't fly, we can't deep dive without the gear, which is required, oxygen cylinders, scuba gear, etc., etc. So there are certain limitations to our body, and the mind, which basically wants to be free, the soul wants to be free, but it is trapped inside this body. So our mind sort of creates that relief when we are sleeping, for the soul or for the intellect to explore these things beyond the boundaries set by the body or the rules of physics in this world. So I think that's my take on it.
So basically, like dreams are allowing you to navigate this whole space that we live in, and this certainly is like a physical space that we interact with. But dreams take you out of those physical confinements, and they allow you to explore like what your mind really has going on inside. And sometimes you're not even aware about that. I was thinking about this unconsciously, and you dream about it, and you remember, oh, that somebody existed in my life, or maybe that someplace I never remembered that I went there, or things like that. And that's why people relate to dreams, or they have these different theories on whether a dream means this or it means that. But yeah,
Yes.
isn't it just fascinating, like how beautifully this mind has evolved, and it has become this thing on through which it allows us to, like, it's just traveling through whatever different realities that could exist or maybe do exist somewhere out there.
Definitely. And that is why they say that we haven't even explored more than 10% of our mental capacities. And when we talk about siddhis, in the Ashta Siddhis, and there are 18 other siddhis. That is supposed to be a stage when you have gained complete control over your mind as well. And that is why you can do these, or you can perform these miracles, the levitation, walking on water, or, reducing or increasing your size, etc., traveling through lokas. There are siddhis that allow the yogis to leave their body behind, and the soul can travel to different lokas. There's a lot of these magical powers that are described, but of course we don't see it happening in the physical world, so we tend to not believe them. But what if we actually gained control over our mind so much that these became possible? And that's what the yogis are trying to do through meditation. They're trying to hone their skills. They're trying to make their mind so strong that they can perform these activities. Of course, their purpose is not to perform these activities. Their purpose is enlightenment. But in a way, when you are honing your skills, your mental skills, you will arrive at a stage when a lot of these things that were not physically possible for you earlier would become possible. So definitely, there's a lot of research that needs to be done into this. And there are yogis, who survive in the Himalayas, even when it's snowing, and they're wearing next to nothing. How is it possible? We are like shivering with thermals and sweaters and t-shirts and jackets and everything. We're still shivering. And how are these yogis surviving there? They're sitting in the snow and just meditating. It's just the meditation that is bringing them so much heat there, that's allowing their body to generate so much heat that they can withstand that cold. They don't even feel that cold. And somewhere, it's also related to the way, as you said, the ancient people used to perform tapasyas for thousands and thousands of years. How is it possible for a body to perform that? It was only because they, through that meditation on the name of God, or through pranayam, controlling their breath, that they could develop that mental faculty to perform things which would not have been possible, otherwise for a normal human being to do.
When someone listens to this and finds this very grand, and whenever we think about these things, they always seem out of reach, right? So I'm just a guy who's listening to this podcast. What can I do in my life to have some of these powers? And I am not capable of all of this, and I understand that, because most of us don't even have like a percent of knowledge on what our culture even has to offer. And we again don't have that drive to go on and figure that out. And we always encourage people to go read about it, write about it, but most people don't, and that's the reality, and most people certainly won't. But for someone who's just listening to this podcast, and we'll try to wrap this up with it, but do you think that Hinduism and its culture thinks that there's a purpose, or there's a way to recognize your purpose on this planet, or through this life experience that you have? So if someone does nothing on the lines of, or if someone hears this at any point in their life and they think, what some things could I do right that make me realize my purpose? So I know this is like, again, this is like too elaborate, too concise in some time, but what would be like your say to them?
So I feel, Ripu, there is two things. One is the duties or the responsibilities that have been assigned to you as a person, by means of your birth situation, or your birth circumstances, the kind of family that you're born in, the kind of stage of life that you are in right now, that defines to a great extent what is your purpose of life at that point of time. And the ultimate purpose of life that the scriptures tell us is to get the realization that we are not just these bodies, we are the souls that are inhabiting these bodies. So the ultimate purpose of life is to get out of these bodies, attain salvation, get out of the cycle of life and death. That should be the ultimate goal for all of us. But, that goal is a very grand goal and a very ambitious goal. So we have to get there step by step. And at whichever stage of life we are, some people are not fortunate enough to be born in well-to-do families. For them, securing the basic necessities of life is the first step. It's only when you have, the basics available to you, food, shelter, security, love, it's then that your mind is calm enough that it can start thinking about higher pursuits. So for each person, what stage of life they are in, what situation is existing around them, if someone's living in a country which is torn in war, which is, there's still a lot of countries in our world, which are undergoing such unfortunate circumstances. Even in our neighborhood, we have countries like that, where people don't have that basic freedom to pursue what they want to do, So if you are stuck in such a situation, you will not think about salvation. You would not think about grand goals of life. Your primary aim is to survive, and live another day. So I think it depends a lot on what our circumstances are. And that is why the scriptures say that if you're born in a family that is giving you the freedom from all these worries, you're born in a decent family, even a middle class family where you don't have to worry. Your parents have struggled. Your parents have brought you to a certain place in life or a certain level in life. And ahead of that, it is your own efforts which will take you ahead, right? Your efforts in your school, in your education, in your career, that will take you to a higher level, next level of life, of material benefits. But once you have that comfort and once you achieve those material benefits, that is when you should at least start thinking about spiritual goals as well. And unfortunately, a lot of people lose themselves in those material benefits. They just keep amassing wealth. They keep, hoarding money. You see so many people who are just so unsatisfied, even after achieving so much. So on one hand, ambition is good. But on the other hand, it is not good to be always dissatisfied. You will never ever be able to, explore something beyond this material hankering, for more. So a lot depends on what your situation in life is, what your upbringing is, what is the kind of environment you are in. And of course, a lot of it depends on what kind of exposure you're getting to. What kind of exposure of higher thoughts or spiritual thoughts that you are getting. Unless there's somebody who has guided you in your childhood, or, there's something that you see or you hear or you read, which triggers a thought in your mind, it is very difficult to awaken your intellect to these possibilities. We have all heard stories of Hanuman performing these miracles. But how many of us actually want to become like Hanuman, and get those powers? So that's what you said, that, we recognize that there are some limitations. We may not be able to do all these things, but that's not where the thought should end. You should try and achieve whatever is possible for you. And there's a very beautiful thought in the Bhagavad Gita where Sri Krishna says, Arjun actually asks Sri Krishna, he says that, what if I'm trying, what if I'm struggling and what I'm trying to achieve salvation? I'm stepping into this spiritual path and I'm putting all my efforts, right? But what if I don't achieve the end goal? So I'm left neither here nor there. I stopped enjoying the material benefits and I haven't achieved the spiritual goal also. So what is the benefit that I'm getting out of it? And Krishna, Krishna and Arjuna are friends, so Krishna is guiding him so beautifully. And Krishna says that, Arjun, God will never forgive the efforts you put. Whatever efforts you have put in your life to achieve salvation or on the spiritual journey, God remembers those. And even if in this life you cannot achieve it, in the next life, God will put you in a family or in a situation where you can continue that journey. So that your efforts are not lost. Whatever you're doing in this life is not lost, it is not forgotten. God keeps a track of all your efforts, and He's helping you achieve those efforts ultimately in the next life. So I think that's the beautiful thought, that we have to strive, and whatever we are able to achieve, that is good enough, at least for this stage of life or this time of life. And if we persevere, if we continue on this journey, we continue on this path, there are good things that will happen. If not in this life, at least in the next life. But that is the positive thought, that, no effort goes waste. So never shy from exploring, never think too much about, starting on this journey. Whatever you can achieve, wherever you can reach, I think that is good enough for you. That is what was meant for you in this life, probably. But if you miss this opportunity, then God only knows where we will land up in the next births, right? So
yeah, and that's this comes back to the thing that you were saying earlier, that once you internalize the idea of that you're not and you put out this on one of your social media handles as well, that and it is talked about more, like we're not physical beings having spiritual experiences, we're spiritual beings having physical experiences. And once you internalize that concept, and then you don't feel the need, suddenly after completing those basic requirements that you need to do, then you don't feel the need to hoard, maybe, because then you know that this is not something that will end with me. This is not something that I have to accumulate and I have to keep always to get hold of. And once you realize that this is a physical experience that I'm having, and as far as I can get after completing my duties and responsibilities, and that story was also again very beautiful. So you don't try to reach to the end goal, you just try to get started on that journey and reach wherever you are able to. And in that process, maybe you find out some things about yourself that you didn't know, and
exactly.
that's a good result. Yeah,
don't get disappointed, you don't get discouraged that, I had planned. I see a lot of people, and I told you last time that I used to go to ISKCON a lot, and there were a lot of people who have this certain target in their mind, that I want to do so many rounds of mala, of jap, using the mala, the rosary, which has 108 beads. So there are people who set a target for themselves that I have to do 16 rounds in a day. And, when they are not able to do it, they get very anxious. But I feel, it's very, whatever you can do, it's adding to your merit, right? It's helping you in a way. So we shouldn't get discouraged. We shouldn't get disappointed. And we should just try and put efforts and continue on this journey.
That's the beautiful note that Dr. Vineet has for all of you listeners out there. And it's always a pleasure talking to you. And I've had this pleasure of knowing you. I don't know, this is like one of the gifts that this podcast has given. And certainly people are now, and I'm really excited, because people are now discovering your work. They're reading about you more. They're watching you more. And it's so cool. Like we're trying, in some sense, this is happening, that people are now getting interested in knowing about their own culture instead of shying away and not even looking at it and moving towards the different resources that we had earlier for Western culture. Or you talked about like how the Hollywood has created this beautiful hype and look about the Greek mythology or the other cultures. And this is fun. This is a good journey to be on, and I'm sure people do love hearing about you and reading about your work. Thank you so much for doing this again, Dr. Vineet. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
And I'm glad I could answer at least some of the questions that your audience has asked. And I hope they've got the answers that they were looking for. And again, I think this is a journey of exploration for all of us. We may not have the answers at one time, but if we keep exploring, we keep finding the answers, the journey keeps becoming beautiful.
And this brings us to the end of this really awesome episode of the Most Serious Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it did add some value in your life. We will be back again with another interesting conversation pretty soon.